I say okay, that means we are rolling. And a 1, and a 2, and a 1, 3, 5, 9. Diddy ba 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 ba. Sibby ba ba beep ba ba. Ba da ba 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 ba. Biddy biddy boo. I'm a little tired. This commute is not that bad. Like I either have gotten used to it or it's just gotten a little bit better. But without fail, the final bus that I take, which is only like a 10-minute ride, if that, but a 40-minute walk, and every day I get to my last stop. It's supposed to be there at 9 past, and here he comes, 18 past. And to add insult to injury, might I add, there are no fewer than 4 or 5 buses the whole time, but they're never mine. It's always just like, ugh, it's such a buh. And then, but I say ultimately fat. All right, picks of the week. It's not slow. It's just one of those periods where there's not a lot of new comics hitting the stands. I don't think there was only one number one that I got this week, and that was Legion of X. And I mean, I'm not in a hurry to read it as I am with these, maybe. And I'm not even in a super rush for this. Look, I just have to fill airtime, or the sponsors will be right up my ass. So, I start with Devil's Reign Omega, and we are now counting Greek letters as number in the numbering system. It's supposed to be alphanumeric. Back in the 90s, they got really cute with the numbering and did 0 issues. That was a 90s thing. And then of course it led from there to a 1/2 issue, and then there were -1 issues. It's very silly. And now it's like it's rush week every month here. This Greek lettering, whatever. Devil's Reign was the big Daredevil event, one of the 3 major events going on at the same time, right? Devil's Reign, Reckoning War, and a third thing. What is the? I want to say there is another like because I was reading it and I was like, oh right, this is going on at the same time. No, I think that was the Reckoning War that I'm thinking of. Regardless, it was really great. I mean, Chip Zdarsky's run on Daredevil, I really can't talk about it enough. Oddly enough, I don't own the whole thing. I actually, and as I'm sure I've mentioned, like I've been buying Daredevil. Daredevil was the first comic when I started like really collecting comics again in late 2001. Daredevil was the very first title that I put on my pull list. It was Daredevil, and then it was Action and Detective, because I decided I was going to be a little more of a DC guy. Because honestly, I missed so much Marvel stuff that I was like, you know what, I'm just going to start fresh over here, start a new life in a new universe. That was in '86. All right, sorry. The hell was I on about? Oh, right. So I've been reading Daredevil longer than almost anything, and then when they killed him again, whenever they want to change creative teams now, they have to make there has to be a big splash at the end, and then the next guy has to like pick it up from there. So I think he got killed, and then they ended the title, and then Charles Soule did a Daredevil Reborn. No, that's a different series, but a similar thing, a mini series wherein he comes back. And at that point, I was like, okay, it's been a solid couple decades. I'm going to step away for a minute. But then I started reading the Zdarsky run eventually on the app, and I was like, this is the best run in years. Which is that's the weird thing about Daredevil, is that it doesn't feel like a book that I don't know anybody else who reads Daredevil, but I don't really know, aside from the dorks at the shop. And I don't even really know that many of them. But even when I lived and worked in a shop in San Diego, I don't remember really being able, maybe Frank read Daredevil regular. But Daredevil has just always had really good creative teams. In the 90s, I want to say they were down years for everybody. But you had starting from, the title has always been great. But 60s, 70s Daredevil is very kind of standard superhero fare of the time. And it wasn't that popular a book. Um, I think it was only every other month instead of a monthly schedule, which is what they would do with books that weren't that popular because they could only have so many. That's a whole other thing. Um, but then they gave it to Frank Miller in the late '70s, and it became the biggest deal. And that's like such a comic book thing to happen. Um, kind of a new kid on the block. Um, the big one of the big two is like, here, take this crappy book that nobody cares about, and if you fail, it's not going to be any skin off my nose because the book's about to get canceled anyway. And if you succeed, then I'll be hailed as a genius for having noticed that. So it happened with Alan Moore and Swamp Thing. It happened with Neil Gaiman and Sandman. And it happened with Frank Miller and Daredevil. And then who took over for Daredevil? 80s Daredevil. And then it kind of, to be honest with you, like 80s and 90s Daredevil kind of goes back to just kind of like standard superhero stuff. But that was also when I was reading it, and I really enjoyed it. And now I'm having trouble remembering. I know Ann Nocenti, and actually Ann Nocenti's run was really, really good. But no, it wasn't as flashy as like a lot of other Daredevil runs. Because then, starting into the 2000s, you had Bendis, Brian Michael Bendis, and Alex Maliev, and their incredible run on that book. And then, see if I can remember this. It went after Bendis. Bendis had it for at least a decade. And then I think it went Brubaker. And then, no, I'm never going to be able to pull all these names. But it was like Greg Rucka, uh, Ed Brubaker. Pretty sure Rucka, anyway. I know for sure Ed Brubaker wrote Daredevil for a while. Mark Waid. And Mark Waid again. And there's another one in there that I'm forgetting that was really good too. Charles Soule eventually was like kind of the last run that I read before Zdarsky, but okay, good. A little minor ramble, but yeah, Daredevil has always been a rock solid book. Well, I guess not always, but it's always been an underdog sort of a book, and I've always liked it. I think that's the other thing too. That I think the appeal that Daredevil holds for a lot of guys like me is that he checks all the other box. Like he's very close to your other what they call the Marvel Knights characters, the characters who are all based in New York and are more like street level, which is a phrase that only kind of recently came into vogue, and largely I think from the movies. I never really heard it applied quite so much. I could be mistaken. So and they're all very similar. They're all kind of darker. Spider-Man not so much, and I think technically since the Fantastic Four are based in New York, they're considered Marvel Knights. They had a Marvel Knights title for a while. Daredevil is kind of the underdog. He's kind of just a generic character. I think it's like the thing where it's easy to be a big Spider-Man fan. Spider-Man's a very popular character and always has tons of books. But if you're in Daredevil, it's a little, dare I say, cooler? No, I daren't. They just used the contraction daren't. I also got the Rush #6. I'm pretty sure this is the final issue, and I really am kind of in a hurry to read it because it's been really, really great. I'm pretty sure I talked about the first issue when that came out, but it's written by Cy Spurrier, whose work I've been really enjoying for the last decade or so when he's kind of become bigger over here. I think he was another 2000 AD guy come out of England or the UK anyway. And he's had some, like he writes X-Men and stuff. Like he's had some real like name stuff. I'm reaching for words. He's very. I would consider him a well-known writer, but it feels like this is a little more under the radar. It is on Vault, which is not a huge indie publisher, but it's set during the Alaskan gold rush. Yes, I believe it's in the Yukon, which is not, you don't read a story set in that every day. This woman's son went to the Yukon to find his fortune, and then misfortune occurred, and his mother went to find out what happened. This a young mom, and things of a supernatural nature make themselves apparent. But so, I mean, I really like that. It's like a almost a Western. It's not technically, but I would consider stories like set during the gold rush to be Westerns, sure. And also, Spurrier does this. He's really got an ear for dialogue. I think that's like, I was thinking about it today. He's got, that is his biggest thing, I would say. But he also has a real, I believe, he's very creative as to where his stories go. They're not all great. There was one, gosh, now I can't remember the name of it. I read the whole thing, I'm pretty sure, but there was one that he did where everybody had a god that was like theirs, that would, and had powers and stuff, like almost like a genie, but not. Except for this one guy who's like the main guy in the book. Was that called Coda? Or is that the movie with Marley Matlin? Everybody's finally realizing what a tremendous actress she is. Big round of applause for Marley Matlin. That's mean. That's not that mean. It's pretty clever, in fact. Anyway, wasn't my favorite. I'm pretty sure I read the whole thing. I actually know. I'm mixing up books. Coda is a book that he did that I also didn't much care for. Here's my point. Dude. Spurrier's strengths, dialogue settings, and he does. Yeah, one of the things I really like about a good Western is when they talk very almost Victorian like. Deadwood is the best example for that. And I feel like Deadwood immediately, and obviously purposefully, if you have not watched Deadwood, I highly recommend getting one of your friends, getting one of your more successful friends HBO login and watching it. It's like 4 seasons and a movie, but totally worth it. And what everybody knew about it at the time and remembers about it still is it was so full of swearing. Like, people were aghast and they'd ever seen a Western with so much dirty language, much less, or anything really. It was more than The Sopranos, I want to say. And but that really covered up David Milch's excellent writing, and they would all talk like these very, there were a lot of swear words, but then there were a lot of characters who spoke very like it was just it always seemed like everybody, which is a suspicion I've had for a long time, but everybody was just spoke a little more fluently and diligently, even when they were like just minors or low class types. So, and Spurrier has nailed that in this book, and I really have been enjoying that. He does a lot of. This is something that I only find effective in comic book form. You don't see it in fiction that often because it's obnoxious. But like, he writes in everyone's, like, if somebody has a stutter, that's not that unusual. If somebody's whispering, though, he makes the font, the lettering very small. Like, he's very keen on the lettering. He's not doing the lettering himself, but he's clearly writing in such a way that the letterer has to pay very close attention. And yeah, it really works. That's something that I always really like, is when you see a creative person or an artist doing something that they could really only do in that medium, and they're doing that well. That's like, that's why they made comic books. That's why these aren't just supposed to be springboards for television and movies and stuff like that. All right, well, enough of the Scott McCloud routine. That's been Picks of the Week. Ba-da, ba-da, ba-da. And now Picks of the Week. Boy, I have got the sillies. You ever get that tired where you just are silly as silly billies? So So first up is something I did not show you last week, but I think I mentioned. This is Duo number 1. This is the first new milestone book. It's Earth M. It's not even. Did I explain this? I feel like I did. Oh, I was talking about Bloodstone Kid, I think. But yeah, all of the Milestone is an imprint of DC Comics, and all of the characters in the Milestone universe, which are largely characters of color, that all the stories take place in Dakota City, which is that's a very DC thing to have made up cities. Marvel is the world outside your window. I mean, I believe like New York and Los Angeles exist in the DC universe, but Metropolis does not exist anywhere else, obviously. And I don't know. I don't pay that close attention. Back in the 90s when Milestone first started, it was separate from DC continuity for sure. There was a crossover at one point where it was, the Justice League met the Milestone characters. And then I think eventually, like DC will do this, Marvel does it too. I mean, they both do it. But there was, where they just do a lot of goofy shit with the multiverses. And there was a real push, I want to say in like 2012, 2013, maybe a little bit later even, to just put them all into one. Because DC owned Milestone and owned Wildstorm, which had initially been an Image thing. And so they had all these, and then they had always had Infinite Earths and stuff and various crises on them of varying lengths of time. So I believe I know for sure they brought all of the Authority, which were a Wildstorm property originally, and all of those characters became just DC characters, which was kind of goofy, to be honest, because they were just analogs for DC characters. So the Midnighter is Batman, Apollo is Superman. I mean, they're not, but they are. So it just seems kind of silly. And I don't know if they did that. So Milestone at the time was not a thing. I think those characters might get mentioned. I think this was during Multiversity, which I want to say was in 2014. And which is a really good book. In fact, I've been meaning to reread it because it was written by Grant Morrison. And I think it's the last thing he did that I really, really enjoyed. I still read he doesn't write nearly as much anymore. And I read his Green Lantern, and it was fine. But Multiversity was the last thing he wrote where I was like, gosh, this guy is a really good writer. Oh no, I've been on a bird walk. Do tell. This is the first time. I don't think the current Milestone continuity takes place inside the regular DC universe, but I won't swear to it. This is the first book that does not take place in Dakota City. It just takes place. He uses beyond Dakota City and Milestone to discover Earth M. So, yeah, it's about a nice couple, and they get superpowers. I don't remember. I'm not gonna. I really have gone on too long. Also, I'm starving. Black Hammer Reborn. This I will open up and look at again because this was the final issue of this series. I do believe there is one more issue or one more miniseries. Yeah, to be continued in Black Hammer: The End. So I feel like that'll be if not a miniseries, more likely an oversized one shot. And I mean, there's not much to report back. If you haven't read Black Hammer, I again cannot recommend it enough. Speaking of analogs for the DC universe, who also do meet their DC counterparts in Black Hammer and Justice League. But yeah, Black Hammer is Jeff Lemire's version of the DC universe. The story starts as we find 5 or 6, I want to say, superheroes living on a farm in the middle of nowhere in a small town America. And as the story goes on, we find out that they're not living as superheroes. Well, those who can pass as human are doing so. We come to find out that they had been fighting this anti-god He was like this massive, basically kind of the anti-Monitor from DC. Uh, and they were all fighting, and Black Hammer, who is missing from the entire story, most of it really. Um, they like he was made one last kind of hurrah. They stopped Anti God, but then they all woke up in this farm in this small town that they cannot leave. It's like mystical or something. They can't get out. That's the bulk of it. But over the years, like he made it so he made so he built all their backstories. Filled us all in on who they were. And it was very clearly Jeff Lemire, who's a huge DC guy. I mean, who writes for DC, but as like I've read everything he's done, and I know that he grew up as much into DC as I was into Marvel. So he's got all these DC stories that they wouldn't even let him write. So he's like, I'm just going to do it. And that's the other. It's like a lot of these sorts of books are there's actual swear words in adult situations. It's not just kid stuff. It's trying to be a real, and it's really good. But then he filled in the universe, the Black Hammer universe, so much that it just kind of took on its own Astro City like qualities. And so there's been all these spin-offs and miniseries, and minor characters will get whole long things. It's so much fun, and I'm really bummed that it's ending. It's probably for the best, because I want to say it's been a good decade that he's been doing these. Yeah, that sounds about right. But man, I really, really have always very much whenever Black Hammer came out, I'm always super excited. I also read Fuck This Place #1. This was really fun too. This is a haunted house story, but also Kyle Starks, of course, has to do the standard 2-page write up as to why I'm writing this, and he describes it thusly. I wanted to write a horror story, but I wanted to be somewhere I could smash and weave my way through those delicious subgenres of horror stories. Like I want a haunted house story with UFOs and with monsters and with this and with that and the other thing. And so that's what you get. We have our two main characters whose names elude me are a nice couple, and they inherit this one in here inherits a house from an estranged relative, only to find out that it's very, very haunted and that they cannot leave. So, hence the title, which I really enjoy more than anything. But it's a good book, and I'm looking forward to reading more of it. And of course, Shaolin Cowboy. There's nothing I can really say that I didn't say last time, but I can show more than just the opening page. I mean, you can stare at Darrow's art for hours, but look, I opened the page and I just stared at that for like a good 20 minutes trying to and he's got all kinds of little weird things and jokes in there. And then there's a very long fight scene with a Komodo dragon. It's just insane. And it's like so well choreographed. It's hard to without sitting down and reading it. But like every panel, there's very little dialogue as usual. And I don't. The guy is a genius. Is all I'm saying. I don't throw that word around as much as I used to. But yeah, Darrow is just an incredible craftsman, and I'm just blown away every time I read him. And this has been another very long episode of Wednesday I'm in Love, hosted by Jimmy Calloway. Also, sorry, now I'm just being goofy. All right, go home.